The market was loud, filled with smoke, strange smells, and cruel laughter. Cages lined the street, metal bars rattling as creatures inside cried and begged. Merchants shouted prices, their voices mixing with the sound of whips cracking. Tonight, the richest buyers of the colony had gathered, all eager to spend credits on living bodies. At the center of the market, under a bright light, stood a small cage. Inside was a young alien girl, her skin pale, her eyes wide with fear. She looked no older than 20, thin from hunger, her hands shaking as the merchant pulled her forward. The auctioneer raised his voice. Here it is, a rare pleasure animal, exotic, obedient, and young. The crowd laughed, some whistled, others shouted disgusting offers. To them she was not a person, only an object to be owned. The girl pressed herself against the bars, her heart racing. She remembered how her people were hunted, captured, and sold in cages like this. Her mother had screamed as soldiers dragged her away. Now she stood alone, waiting for the highest bidder. She prayed someone kind would buy her, but she knew kindness was rare here. From the shadows, a middle-aged human man watched quietly. His clothes were plain, his face tired, but his eyes were sharp. He did not laugh with the others, he did not cheer for the merchant. Instead, he studied the girl as if trying to see past her broken state. The auctioneer clapped his hands. "We start at 500 credits." Hands shot up instantly. The bidding began fast. 600, shouted a fat alien noble. 700, called another. The girl's stomach twisted. Each number was another chain tightening. She closed her eyes, waiting for the moment her cage would belong to a monster. Then, in the middle of the chaos, a calm voice rose. 1,000, the human said. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then burst into laughter. All heads turned toward him. This plain man with no wealth, no fine clothes. Some mocked him. Why waste money on a beast? Another laughed. Humans have strange tastes. But the auctioneer's eyes gleamed. 1,000 was a high price. Do we have more? 1,000 going once. The fat noble hesitated, grumbling, but did not raise his hand. Going twice, shouted the auctioneer. The girl opened her eyes, her gaze meeting the human's for the first time. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes did not carry the hunger of the others. They carried something else, something she could not name. Sold. The auctioneer slammed his staff. The cage was unlocked, the merchant grinned, and the girl was pushed toward the human. Chains still hung from her wrists as she stumbled forward. The crowd whispered, laughed, and mocked. Enjoy your animal. Human, someone shouted. Another jeered. Maybe he's too old for real women. Their words cut deep, but the human ignored them. He placed a cloak over her shoulders, covering her thin body. The girl froze. No one had ever done such a thing for her. It was warm, soft, and smelled faintly of earth and wood. She looked up at him, confused. Why cover me? She whispered. The man did not answer. He only guided her away from the crowd. His hand was steady, not rough, not cruel. For the first time in years, her heart felt a flicker of something dangerous, hope. As they left the marketplace, the whispers followed them. Foolish human, wasting money, he'll regret it. But the man kept walking, his steps heavy but sure. The girl kept glancing at him, wondering if she had escaped one prison only to fall into another. Her mind screamed, "What does he want from me?" Yet deep inside, another voice whispered, "Why does he feel different?" The path grew quieter as they reached the edge of the colony. The lights of the market faded behind them, replaced by the cool silence of the night. The girl finally spoke, her voice trembling. What will you do with me?" The man stopped walking, his eyes looking ahead into the dark. For a long moment, he did not answer, and the silence felt like thunder in her chest. Finally, he said only 4 words, calm and heavy. "Not what they think." Her heart skipped, confusion deepening. She did not know what he meant, but one thing was clear. Her story was no longer chained to that cage. Something had changed the moment this human raised his hand, and whatever awaited her in his home, it was not what the galaxy expected. The night was cold as the human led the alien girl away from the noisy market. The streets grew quiet. Only the sound of their footsteps remained. She walked slowly, still weak from hunger, her chains clinking with every step. The cloak around her shoulders kept her warm, but inside her heart, there was only fear. Every few steps, she looked at the man beside her. He did not glance at her. His face was calm, almost distant. He walked like someone carrying a heavy weight that no one else could see. The girl wondered again and again. Why did he buy me? Why pay so much just to walk in silence? At last, they reached the edge of the colony. Beyond the houses and the lanterns was a small road leading into the forest. The man followed it until they arrived at a quiet wooden house built near the river. It was simple, nothing like the grand homes of the rich nobles. Yet to the girl, who had known only cages and stone floors, it felt unreal. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and a wave of warmth spread out. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth, filling the room with orange light. The smell of cooked food made her stomach twist with hunger. She hesitated at the door, afraid to step in, but the man only said, "Come inside," his voice low but steady. She obeyed, her feet bare against the wooden floor. The warmth touched her skin, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like shivering. The man pointed toward a chair by the fire. "Sit." She froze, confused. Slaves were never told to sit, they were ordered to kneel. Slowly, she sat down, still gripping the edge of the cloak tightly. The man moved to the kitchen area and began to prepare a plate. Her eyes followed him carefully, searching for signs of danger. Would he pour a drink laced with something? Would he wait until she was weaker? Her chest tightened, every sound making her flinch. Finally, he placed a plate of warm bread and stew in front of her. The smell made her head spin and her stomach growled loudly. She looked at him in shock, then back at the food. Her lips trembled. "For me?" The man gave a short nod and sat across from her. She did not wait any longer, her hands shaking as she tore the bread and dipped it into the stew. Each bite burned her tongue, but she didn't care. She ate like someone who hadn't known kindness in years. The man said nothing, only watched quietly. Not the hungry gaze of the buyers at the market, but something else. Something almost protective. When she finally slowed down, embarrassed by how fast she had eaten, he poured water into a cup and slid it across the table. She drank deeply, the cool liquid washing away the dry taste of fear. For a long time, silence filled the room. Finally, the girl dared to ask, her voice small, "What do you want from me?" Her words trembled in the air, heavy with fear and expectation. The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes staring into the fire. "Rest," he said simply. "You need rest." Her confusion only grew. Rest? No orders, no chains, no demands. She looked at him, trying to understand, but his face gave nothing away. It was like a wall. All she could see was the faint shadow of sorrow in his eyes. After the meal, he unlocked the chains around her wrists and set them on the table. The girl stared at the metal, her hands suddenly free for the first time in years. Her voice cracked. You're not keeping them on me?" The man shook his head. "You're not a prisoner here." Her heart raced, unsure if this was a trick, but when she touched her wrists, she felt the skin breathe again. Tears filled her eyes, though she quickly wiped them away. He showed her a small room with a bed covered in blankets. "Sleep here," he said, his voice firm but gentle. The girl stood frozen in the doorway. Staring at the bed, she had slept on cold floors in cages and filth, never on something soft like this. Her throat tightened. Why are you doing this?" The man paused, his hand on the doorframe. He looked at her for a long moment and finally answered, "Because you deserve better." Her breath caught in her chest. She did not know if she could believe those words, but the way he said them, quiet, heavy, honest, made something inside her stir. When he left the room and closed the door gently behind him, She sank onto the bed, the blankets wrapped around her warm and safe. She pressed her face into them, and for the first time in years she cried. Not tears of fear, but tears of something new. Something that almost felt like hope. The girl woke slowly, the soft blanket heavy around her body. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Her body expected the cold floor, the sound of iron bars, the smell of damp stone, but instead she felt warmth and the faint crackle of fire from another room. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. The bed beneath her was too soft, too safe. It felt wrong, unnatural. Her hands went to her wrists, half expecting to feel chains biting into her skin. But there were no shackles, no heavy cuffs. Only faint red marks left from years of captivity. Her mind whispered, "It's a trick. Don't trust it. No one is kind without reason." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and stared at the door. Would he walk in and reveal his true demand? Would he show the cruelty she had always known? Hours passed before she finally left the room. She found the human outside. Working silently in the yard, he was chopping wood, the axe rising and falling with slow, steady rhythm. He did not look at her, did not call her, did not order her. He simply worked as if her presence meant nothing. The silence was strange, almost frightening. She had been taught that silence never lasted. Commands always followed. Punishments always came, but here silence just existed. She sat on the steps, hugging the blanket, and her mind began to wander back to the chains, the cages, the screams. She remembered the night her world burned. Her people had lived in peace, farming the hills under the twin moons. She had been gathering water when the sky split open. Ships descended like falling stars, their engines roaring. The slavers came with nets and rifles. They did not speak her language, they only shouted and struck. She remembered her mother's arms pulling her close. The desperate run through the fields, then the flash of light as soldiers fired. Her mother's scream still haunted her dreams. Hands had torn her away, chains biting her wrists, and from that night on, she had never been free. Years blurred together in darkness. Cages moved from one market to another. Hands grabbing, voices laughing, whips striking. She had forgotten what it felt like to be touched without pain. Forgotten what it meant to be looked at without hunger. Now here she was, sitting outside a quiet house, with a man who had bought her yet treated her like a person. The memory of chains battled against the warmth of the blanket around her shoulders. She wanted to believe, but her scars whispered, "It won't last." The man finally paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow. He noticed her on the steps but said nothing. He only nodded slightly as if greeting a neighbor, then returned to chopping wood. The small gesture stunned her. He acknowledged her without claiming her, without mocking her. It was so small, yet it shook the walls inside her mind. Later that evening, he cooked again, simple stew, bread, and tea. He set the food on the table and motioned for her to eat. She sat down slowly, still cautious. Every bite brought back memories of nights when she was starved as punishment. Food had always been a weapon, never a gift, but here no punishment followed. Only warmth in her stomach. She dared to ask, "Why do you not command me?" The man looked at her, his eyes calm but heavy. "You're not an animal," he said. "You don't need commands." His words pierced through her like sunlight in a dark cave. She almost laughed, almost cried, but instead lowered her gaze. She did not know how to respond. That night, as she lay in bed, memories returned sharper than ever. She saw herself locked in a metal crate, hands of strangers pulling her hair, their voices mocking her cries, the weight of collars pressing down on her neck, the sound of keys turning, chains tightening. She curled into herself, trembling under the blanket, and for the first time in years, she whispered a prayer, not for freedom, but for the courage to believe this strange new life. The human sat by the fire in the other room. He heard her muffled sobs but did not enter. Instead, he added another log to the flames. He knew some wounds could not be healed with words. Only time and the slow weight of kindness. Outside, the forest was silent, but inside the quiet house, something unseen had begun. A fragile trust, growing slowly between a broken girl and a man with secrets of his own. And though the memories of chains still haunted her, for the first time the girl thought, maybe I am more than what they made me. The sun rose over the colony, painting the small houses with gold. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and the sound of children's laughter echoed in the air. To the girl it was strange, peaceful, almost unreal. She had lived so long among cages and chains that she had forgotten what mornings could sound like. The human man worked outside early, chopping wood and fixing the fence. He gave her no orders, no harsh words. Instead, he let her sit quietly on the porch, wrapped in the same cloak he had given her. She watched the trees sway in the wind and felt sunlight on her face. It should have been peaceful, but inside her chest, there was unease. By noon, the first villager came. Carrying baskets of fruit, the woman stopped at the gate, her eyes falling on the girl, her face twisted, and she whispered to herself before walking away quickly. The girl lowered her gaze, shame burning her cheeks. She had seen that look before. It was the same look buyers gave at the market, but here it carried disgust instead of hunger. Soon more villagers noticed her. Children pointed, giggling, "Look, the human brought an animal home." Their mothers hushed them, but their eyes were sharp. Old men shook their heads, muttering. The whispers grew, spreading like fire across the colony. By evening, the market stalls buzzed with talk. "The human bought one of those," one man spat. "He wastes his money," said another. Some laughed. "Maybe he's too lonely." Others whispered darker things. Imagining what he did behind closed doors, the girl heard it all. Though no one spoke directly to her, every laugh, every whisper felt like knives in her chest. She wanted to scream, "I am not an animal," but her voice stayed locked inside, chained by years of humiliation. That night she sat by the fire. Staring at the floor, the man noticed her silence, but said nothing at first. Finally he asked, "What troubles you?" Her hands tightened around the cup of tea he had given her. They think I am still." "That," she whispered. He did not need her to explain. He knew what she meant. He looked at her, his face calm but serious. "Let them talk," he said softly. "Their words cannot change what you are." But she shook her head, tears burning in her eyes. "They see me as less, always less. No matter what I do." The man leaned closer, his voice steady. "You are not what they see. You are what you choose to be." The word struck her deeply, but also frightened her. Choice? She had never been given choice, only orders, only survival. The next day, the whispers grew louder. When she walked with him into the village to buy food, people stared openly. Mothers pulled their children closer. Young men smirked, whispering crude jokes. Merchants hesitated before selling to the human. Some even refused. Each step through the market felt heavier than the chains she had once worn. At one stall, a bold villager sneered, "Why waste money on that thing, human? It's shameful." The girl froze, expecting the man to ignore it, but he turned, his eyes sharp as steel. "She is not a thing," he said firmly, his voice carrying through the market. The crowd went silent for a moment, surprised at the strength in his tone. The villager scoffed, muttering, but said no more. The girl's heart pounded. No one had ever defended her like that. She looked at the human, his back straight, his face unshaken. In that moment she felt something stir inside her, something she had thought long dead, dignity. Yet when they returned home, the weight of the whispers returned with her. She sat by the window, hugging her knees. The forest outside seemed free, open, untamed, but inside, she felt trapped again, not by chains this time, but by shame. "Why do they hate me so much?" she whispered to herself. The man, sitting by the fire, answered quietly, "Because they fear what they don't understand." Fear turns to hate, and hate turns to cruelty. His words stayed in her mind long into the night. She remembered the eyes of the crowd at the market, the whispers in the village, and she realized something painful. Her freedom was not only about chains, it was about how the world saw her. And if she wanted to truly live, she would have to fight not only her memories, but the whispers of those around her. As the firelight flickered, she made a silent promise to herself. She would not always bow her head. She would not always let the whispers cut her down. One day she would prove she was more than their words. But for now she only sat quietly, her heart torn between fear and a fragile spark of courage. A spark the human seemed determined to keep alive no matter what the village said. The whispers in the village had not faded. Every time the human walked into the market, people stared. Every time the girl stepped outside the house, children pointed, and women whispered behind their hands. But one night, all of that changed. It began with smoke on the horizon. The colony guards rang bells, shouting warnings. "Raiders! Raiders are coming!" Panic spread through the streets. Families locked doors, parents pulled their children inside, and merchants ran to hide their goods. The human stood on his porch, eyes sharp. The girl saw something different in him that night. Not the quiet sadness he usually carried, but a hard steel, the kind born from battles past. He took an old rifle from above the fireplace, checking its weight. His voice was calm, but it carried command. "Stay inside. Do not come out." The girl froze, gripping the cloak around her shoulders. Every instinct told her to hide, to curl up in fear, to avoid notice. That was how she had survived in cages, by making herself small. But as the man stepped outside into the dark, she felt something twist inside her chest. The sound of engines roared closer. Strange, jagged ships landed beyond the trees, and shadows spilled into the village. The raiders came fast, aliens in armor, carrying burning torches and heavy blades. They stormed through the streets, kicking down doors, dragging people out. Screams filled the night, the girl's body shook. Memories slammed into her mind, nets thrown over her people, soldiers dragging them away, her mother's last scream. It was happening again. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. She wanted to hide. But then she saw the human. He stood in the middle of the road, rifle steady, facing the raiders as if he had no fear. The villagers who mocked him hid in their homes, but he did not move. The first raider rushed him. The rifle cracked, one shot clean, and the raider fell. Another came. Another shot rang out, the girl's heart pounded. This man who had bought her like property was now fighting to protect strangers who spat on his name. And for some reason she could not explain, the thought of him standing alone terrified her. Her hands clenched. She looked around the room. There, near the door, a farming tool leaned against the wall. Her fingers closed around the wooden handle. The weight felt strange but solid. She ran outside. The human turned sharply when he saw her, his voice harsh. "I told you to stay inside." But before he could say more, a raider lunged at him from behind. The girl moved without thinking. She swung the tool hard, striking the raider across the face. The alien stumbled, blood spilling, then collapsed. Her chest heaved. Her arms shook. She had never fought before. Her whole life she had been prey. But tonight she had struck back. The human's eyes widened, not in anger but in surprise. Then he nodded once quickly. "Stay close," he said before turning to fire again. The battle raged. Fires spread through the village as raiders looted homes, dragging valuables into sacks. But they had not expected resistance, not from one human and a girl they thought was weak. Together they fought, he with rifle, she with nothing but a wooden tool and desperate courage. She swung wildly, but her strikes landed. She ducked under blades, stumbling, terrified, but moving anyway. And each time she struck, she felt something strange awaken inside her. A strength she had forgotten, buried under years of fear. At last, the raiders began to retreat. Their leaders shouted in frustration, calling them back to the ships. Engines roared and the shadows slipped back into the night sky. Silence fell over the burning village. The girl stood trembling, her arms aching, her hands blistered from gripping the weapon. Smoke stung her eyes, but inside her chest something burned brighter than the flames. For the first time, she did not feel like a slave. She felt like someone who had chosen to fight. The villagers crept out of their homes, their faces pale. They saw the bodies of the raiders, the smoke, the blood, and they saw the human standing firm, with the alien girl beside him, her face fierce, her hands shaking but unbroken. Whispers rose again, but they were not cruel this time. They fought them back, one voice said. Together, another added. The villagers who had laughed before now stared in silence, unsure how to speak. The human placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, steadying her. His voice was low but firm. "You did well," he said. Her throat tightened. No one had ever said those words to her before. As the fires died down and the night grew quiet again, the girl sat by the man's side. Her body was sore, her mind overwhelmed, but her heart carried something new. She had fought not because she was ordered, not because she was forced, but because she had chosen to stand beside him. And in that choice she had found a piece of herself she thought was gone forever. The village was quiet after the raid. Houses smoked, doors hung broken, and the smell of ash lingered in the air. Families gathered their wounded, whispering thanks to the human who had fought when others hid. But he did not stay to accept their gratitude. Instead, he returned to his small wooden home, silent as always. The girl followed him, her arms sore, her body bruised, but her spirit strangely alive. For the first time, she had not felt like prey. She had stood with him, and the memory of it burned in her chest like fire. That night she sat by the hearth watching him. He cleaned the rifle carefully, his hand steady, his eyes distant. She wanted to speak, to ask the question that had haunted her since the auction, but the words caught in her throat. Finally she whispered, "Why?" The man paused, glancing at her. "Why did you buy me?" "Not for what they thought. Not for what they said. Why?" The silence stretched. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the dark room. At last the man set the rifle down and leaned back, his gaze fixed on the flames. "I had a family once," he began, his voice low and rough. "A wife. A daughter. We lived far from here, on another colony world. Simple, quiet." His hands tightened slightly, the knuckles pale. Then the slavers came. Just like tonight. They burned homes, dragged people away. I tried to fight, but... His voice broke for the first time. The girl's chest tightened. She leaned forward, listening. "They took my wife," he said, staring into the fire. "And my daughter. She was about your age. I never saw them again." He closed his eyes, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. "I searched, paid mercenaries, begged traders for news. Nothing. They were gone." The girl's heart ached. She had lost her mother in the same way, torn apart by slavers. For the first time, she understood the sadness in his eyes. "When I saw you in that cage," he continued, his voice heavy, "it was like seeing my daughter again, helpless, alone, laughed at by monsters." His eyes finally turned to hers, sharp but full of pain. "I couldn't walk away. Not again." Tears stung her eyes. She looked down, gripping the blanket around her shoulders. "You didn't want a slave," she whispered. "No," he said firmly. "I wanted to save at least one. If I couldn't save them, then maybe saving you would mean something." The words struck her harder than any whip ever had. Her throat closed, and she pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. For so long she had believed she was worthless, nothing but property, and yet here was a man who had paid a fortune not to own her, but to give her life back. "I don't deserve this," she said, her voice cracking. His expression softened. "No one deserves chains. Not you, not my wife, not my daughter. No one." The fire flickered between them, shadows dancing on the walls. She could not stop the tears now. They flowed freely down her face, carrying years of silence, years of humiliation. She wept not just for herself, but for him, for the family he had lost, for the pain he carried alone. Slowly she felt his hand rest gently on her shoulder. It was not heavy, not claiming. It was steady, reassuring. "You're free now," he said quietly. "Free to choose your own life. Whether you stay here or go your own way. It will be your choice, not mine." Her breath caught. Choice. The word felt strange, like touching sunlight after years underground. She looked at him through her tears, searching his face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was truth, raw and unhidden. That night she lay awake in the small bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was a storm. Memories of chains, whispers of villagers, the fire of battle, and now, his truth. She thought of the way he looked at her. Not with hunger, not with pity, but with something stronger. Respect. For the first time, she wondered if her life could be more than survival. If maybe, just maybe, she could build something new here. Beside the man who had lost everything but still chose to give her freedom. As sleep finally pulled her under, one thought echoed in her mind. She was no longer just a pleasure animal. She was something else now, something the galaxy would never expect. And tomorrow, she would have to decide who she truly wanted to be. The days after the raid were uneasy in the colony. Houses were rebuilt, fences repaired, but whispers did not stop. Some praised the human for standing against the raiders. Others muttered that he had brought shame by keeping that creature in his home. The girl felt their stares every time she stepped outside. Children still pointed, women still whispered. But there was something new in their eyes now. Hesitation, even fear. They had seen her fight beside him. They had seen her stand with fire in her hands, not crawling in chains. Yet inside she still doubted herself. Every night she remembered the human's words. "You're free now. Free to choose your own life." But choice was heavy. She had never been given it before. One evening the village called a gathering in the square. The head elder stood before the crowd, his voice loud. "These raids will return," he said, "and we must stand united. But how can we trust a man who keeps an animal in his home? It is not our way." The words cut deep. The crowd murmured in agreement. The girl's face burned with shame as dozens of eyes turned to her. The human stepped forward, his face calm, his voice steady. "She is not an animal," he said firmly. "She fought for your homes. She bled to protect your children. Where were you when the raiders came?" "Hiding, while she stood at my side." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The elder sneered. "Then what is she to you, human? A slave, a pet, a shameful indulgence?" The square went silent. The girl's heart pounded. She stared at the human, wondering what he would say. He turned, his eyes meeting hers. And for the first time in front of them all, his voice rang out clear. "She is my wife." Gasps filled the air. The elder's mouth dropped open. The villagers whispered furiously, some in shock, some in anger, some in disbelief. The girl froze, her breath caught in her chest. Wife? Her heart trembled. She had never even imagined such a word could belong to her. The elder scoffed. "Impossible. A human cannot marry one of them. It is against every law of dignity." The human stepped closer, his presence towering though his voice stayed calm. "Dignity is not in chains. Dignity is not in cages. Dignity is in choice, and she chooses to stand beside me." Dozens of eyes turned to her now. The girl's legs shook. Her whole life she had been told she was less, an object, an animal, never a person. And now in front of the entire village she had to speak. Her lips trembled. But when she looked at him, this man who had lost everything yet still gave her freedom, strength rose inside her. She stepped forward, her voice clear though her body trembled. "I am not his slave. I am not his pet. I am not what you call me." Her chest rose and fell, her hands clenched tight. "I am his wife. Because I choose it." The crowd erupted in noise. Some shouted in outrage, others in shock. But above it all, the words hung heavy, unshakable. For the first time in her life, she had spoken not from fear, but from choice. And no whisper could chain that truth. The human placed his hand gently in hers, steady and firm. They stood together in the center of the square, unbroken against the stairs. The elder tried again, but his voice was weaker now. "You disgrace us all," but another villager interrupted, a mother clutching her child. "She saved my son," the woman said quietly. "When the raiders came, she struck one down before it reached him." More voices followed, hesitant at first, then stronger. "She fought for us. She stood when we did not. Maybe she deserves more than our whispers." Slowly, the tide turned. The villagers who had mocked her now looked uncertain, even ashamed. The elder's face twisted in frustration, but he could not silence the crowd. That night, as they returned to their home, the girl walked taller. Her steps were still shaky, but they carried pride. She had spoken. She had chosen, and the world had heard it. Inside the small wooden house, she sat by the fire, her heart still racing. She turned to the human, her voice soft. "You called me your wife." He met her gaze, his expression calm but kind. "Because that's what you are if you wish it. Not property, not shame, my equal." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. She reached out, taking his hand. Her voice shook, but her words were steady. "Yes, I wish it." The firelight flickered, wrapping them in warmth. Outside, the whispers of the village faded into the night. But inside, a new story began. Not of chains, not of cages, but of a human and an alien standing side by side, bound not by ownership, but by choice, by dignity, and by love.